Here we are. This is May the 11th, 2026, with the Parsha Bemidbar. Parsha Bemidbar, which is the uh, fourth book, the first Parsha in the fourth book. We're starting a new book this week. And that is incredible in the sense that, wow, the year has gone by and we're moving into a whole new set of themes. One of which I could say is that, and I may have mentioned this in the previous class, the word Leviticus is probably not a good name for the book of Vayikra, since Leviticus implies Levites, and Vayikra deals mostly with Kohanim. So it should be something like Kohaniticus. uh, but Bamidbar might in fact be a Levitical Torah, because we do spend quite a lot of time thinking about Levites in this book, and there are a few important stories regarding Levites, Korach, which comes in the middle of the book, and at the beginning of the book, where a certain transition takes place between the firstborn and the Levites. And I've been thinking about this for quite a while. In my last week's Parsha sheet, I mentioned that when God says "Kili haaretz" and "Kili bnei Israel," the earth belongs to me, or the land belongs to me, and the children of Israel, they are my servants, they are my slaves, they belong to me. And then it's also ki li kol bechor, ki li bechor, the firstborn belong to me, and that's what God says. And God says this in this parsha twice. Actually, it occurs twice, more so than the children of Israel, and more so than the land. So there's something very special about firstborn, and we have to drill into that. The second thing is there's something very interesting and special about the Levites. We have to think about that as well. And then we have to think about why is it that there is a transition in this, right in this chapter, in this parsha, from firstborn to Levites. Okay, and I'll walk through that, and I have some thoughts about that. In addition to, I'm just going to, for the sake of pedagogy, good pedagogy, putting out an idea at the beginning and kind of working towards it towards the end, which is there a difference between the structure of a family in preserving rights, traditions, knowledge, information, as opposed to individuals who are accorded their status by the accident of their birth. In this case, the firstborn, by the accident of their birth, get the privilege of a status, whereas the Levites, being part of a family and a whole system, they end up becoming that. And so, to state the punchline, it seems that the Torah and Judaism in general is shifting its weight towards the Levites and for family, because the family system is able to preserve knowledge and information, and also I think that there may be some practical advantages to this. So let's get into the text, and we will go ahead, Marlene.
Well, one of them is a community activity and one is a private activity. So you're comparing two different kinds of structures.
What do you mean?
When you talk about the Levites and their job is a community job. My job is a family, and if I'm the firstborn or not it's a different job.
Right. So I'm not sure I see it that way. I think, I'm using the way that family augments or family assists in the preservation of knowledge and information in a way that individuals don't. I mean, it it's I'm going too far ahead here, but I want to say that when you have to dispatch your firstborn to serve in the temple, let's say, if that's were the case, then that person gets trained in a whole language and a whole set of procedures and customs. Whereas if you're a Levite, you see your, and here I'll use patrilineal language because it was patrilineal. You see your father going, doing this, and that's the language that you have. That's part of your natural disposition. It's almost like saying, in families where there are certain professions, okay, these things get passed on just through the organization of the family. Prior to Passover, we had I was dipping into the family run businesses, the food business, Horowitz, Margaritan, the Strites business, the Strite and Manischewitz. So very interesting enough, those are the I mean, I don't want to say the royal families of Jewish Passover food, but there's some very interesting history with regard to how Jewish food companies originated in this country in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and primarily in Manhattan, but also in the Midwest, in Cincinnati. Manischewitz, I think, was there. And these individuals, basically founded their companies, not knowing that they were going to become household names. That was not their intention. Their intention was, well, people need matzah, and we can make matzah. I don't think people, they wanted to become big empires. But what happened was these businesses grew and grew and grew, and they became wealthier, and the families managed these things. And then they run into the question of how to transition from one generation to another. I'm going to show you some stuff on this later on, but you move through one generation, maybe two generations. But in the case of like Strites, for example, I think they got lucky. They got lucky because they were able to transition from, I think they're in their third or fourth generation, and this generation, it's in the video, it's really interesting. This generation that's running the company now, the person that's being groomed is the firstborn daughter of the Strites daughter, and because she has taken an aptitude towards the business, has really learned the business. And how do you learn the business? You learn the business. No, I'm sorry, it was Gold's the horseradish company. You learn the business because you go every day or after school to pack bottles of horseradish, and you watch it grow, and then when you're a teenager, you get a summer job in the business, and you learn how to pack, and you learn the different varieties, et cetera, et cetera. And so it comes to you because of family. You don't have to go to school for this, but you do go to school to get an MBA so that you can learn all sorts of important things about management and how to make a modern company, and then you transition the company for a modern market. So that's luck. That's luck. Not all families have that luck because not all families have the succession plans properly done, and not all families are able to have the native talent in their families. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Okay, so I give you a Vorspeise. Let me give you some text. Okay, and here we go.
I'll just mention,
Yes,
Rabbi, that I
yes.
learned in organizational psychology that most family businesses don't last. So these are exceptions. There are all kinds of rifts and conflicts that come into it. And,
100%.
and there are organizational psychologists that specialize in family companies because there are particular difficulties there, as you could imagine.
Well, I hold
So,
hold that, and we're gonna look at a very short clip of a very famous person talking about the same idea. All right, so here's the opening. This is God speaking to Moses and saying, "Take a head count," and it's 20 years upward. It's basically a head count that is going to organize an army, and we get the names Shalom, Miel, Ben Suri, Shaddai. I've talked about this. I really enjoy examining the various differences between one generation of names and another generation of names. We can relate to that because our generation, we have more, uh, I guess, secular sounding names. But the generations after, my kids only have Hebrew names. We still have double naming in the successive generations, but there is a social history to naming that I think reflects styles and trends and other things. We make fun of poor Berthas. There are not too many girls named Bertha today. Gertrude. We had lots of Gertrudes and Berthas and Marthas and others, but those names have really gone by the wayside. In addition to, for example, I mean, and this is the direct relationship here, and we still get some of this, but to name a child with a Yiddish name today, you don't find that in circles outside of really the Haredi world, and even in that world, it's questionable. Nobody's naming their son Fievel. Nobody's naming their daughter Cyril. Nobody's naming their kid Fegele. But you do have other kinds of styles and names. Often you'll give a Hebrew name. In that world, the Hebrew name gets nicknamed, like Rivka becomes Rivki, and and on and on and on it goes. So I always like to point that out, that in the beginning of Bemidbar you have basically an essay on the social history of names. Let's go back and then so we get the beginning of the census, and I'm going to just skip through this. This is all the data. We've talked about how data gets organized in the Torah through text. I have a small theory about this that this is part of memory of ancient Israel, and most likely, despite the fact that we do have a cantillation to this, there probably were melodies that encoded this information, because all ancient cultures, and ours is no exception, probably kept memory of important data like the number and the sacred numbers of the tribal populations in song, and transmitted it to next generations in song. We've lost all that music, but we have cantillation to kind of remind us of this. Okay, so it goes through all the different tribes, and then it says here, but the Levites, thus they were all accounted for, 603,550. The asterisk is the round number, 600,000, is the biblically agreed upon total of military adult age Israelite males that left Egypt. Casuto, scholar, sees it as an indicator of the centrality of a numbering system based on 60, as was common in Mesopotamia. Others cite the importance of 5 in Assyrian text. In other words, really nobody understands this, okay? And I'm saying this in the sense that we kind of knock our heads on this question every year, and at a certain point we kind of I give up. I don't know how to understand the large number, and I'll take a pass here, which is that it's either a symbolic number or a memory that is encoded in this number, which wants to convey to us the sheer size and magnitude of the Exodus, notwithstanding that historical research, archaeological research, into the question of what happened yields different kinds of conclusions, namely that a very small number, a much smaller number of you know Israelite-ish tribes moved from Egypt to Canaan, and that in Canaan there already were some proto-Israelite tribes that united under one banner. But that's for Bible History 101. This piece of information is for us a symbolic number, and we'll leave it there. But what's important here is what I just lost, which is this verse here. The Levites, by the tribe of their fathers, were not counted in the midst of them. That itself is an interesting little tidbit, and the reason why is because already from chapter 1 we are establishing the Levites as a separate entity within the people. Now, if we go back to what the people is, or how the people is organizing itself, we've spent so much time at the end of the book of Exodus and this entire book of Leviticus talking about the tabernacle and how to do in the tabernacle, the whole system. So that's where we need the Levites. We need people who are going to run this. Okay, so now we get the census of the Levites. Mark the tribe of Levi, you are not to count. Their head count you are not to take up in the midst of the children of Israel. But you make the Levites accountable for the dwelling. So that's their job. Their job is going to be taking care of Mishkan HaEdut, where the testimony dwells. For all its implements, for all that belongs to it, they are to carry the dwelling, and all its implements, they are attend to it, and around the dwelling, they are to camp. So, in other words, they have a job, and their job is to assemble and disassemble and to guard and to keep all of the different elements in the sanctuary. And as we saw, it's quite a substantial undertaking. It requires a lot of work, a lot of expertise, and a lot of manpower. All right, so when the dwelling moves on, the Levites are to take it down. When the dwelling is encamped, the Levites are to set it up. Nice poetry here. When we saw Mishkan Yorid Oto Levim, V'chanot Mishkan Yakim Oto Levim, V'azar Karev Yumat, bam 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 bam. And the one who comes near it is to be put to death. In other words, this is a zone around the sacred. You can't trespass in the sacred zone. You need security clearance to get near the Mishkan, and your security clearance is something that you receive by birth and not by merit. You are only allowed to, if you're a Levite, that's your prerogative. No one else has the prerogative to touch these things or to come close to these things. And to the extent that played itself out, it's a question, but we do have these one remarkable story of Peres Behuza, when David was transporting or getting the ark to be transported from its temporary location to closer to the city of David. The ark was on a wagon, it jostled, somebody stuck out their hand to try and touch it, and he touched it and he was zapped on the spot. This bothers us because why would he be stricken down? And again, this is the idea of the radioactivity, quote unquote, as the analogy of these holy things. Holy things can only be approached by holy people or people who are designated, and once that law is broken, it results in catastrophe, and that's what happened there. Okay, so we have the encampments. The Levites are to camp around the dwelling of the testimony, and the Levites are to keep charge. The children of Israel did it. Chapter 2, we have the organization of the camp. Okay, I'm going to zip through this because it's basically telling us where they camped. And then chapter 3, we have a beginning of Ela Todot Aaron and Moshe, the you know the beginnings of these families, and then the Kohanim, and now the Levim. So God says to Moses, "Bring near the tribe of Levi, have it stand in the presence of Aaron the priest, that they may attend upon him. They are to keep his charge and the charge of the entire community in front of the tent of appointment, to serve the serving tasks of the dwelling. They are to be in charge of the implements of the tent of appointment and the charge of the children of Israel, to serve as serving tasks of the dwelling. You are to give over the Levites to Aaron and to his sons, formerly given over are they to him among all the children of Israel." See, this is kind of, lofty language. Aaron and his sons you are to make accountable. Okay. God says to Moses, "As for me, I hereby take the Levites from the midst of the children of Israel, in place of every firstborn breacher of womb, Peter Rechem, B'bnei Yisrael vayul li haleviim." This is probably one of these two verses are important. I quoted the 13 already. Ki li kol bechor b'yom hakoti kol bechor be'eretz Mitzrayim. For mine is every firstborn. At the time that I struck down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, I hallowed to me every firstborn in Israel, from man to beast. We got to just kind of pause here, okay? And I'm going to just let that verse sink in for a second, and then pause here and understand what we're talking about and what the world is. So we're in a world prior to this moment where the firstborn gets consecrated. And if you recall at the Exodus has the moment of the slaying of the firstborn, the 10th plague, which is the climactic moment of the Exodus. The way I interpret the slaying of the firstborn is that what it does is it removes the kind of the elite echelon that surrounds Pharaoh, and basically is a decapitation of all of the secondary leadership of Egypt. It would be akin to eliminating all of the general staff of, let's say, a great foe, Iran, okay, in one swell swoop. I don't think the IDF gets its instructions from the Bible, but as a strategy, you do want to eliminate the leadership of your adversary's army early on in the war, early on in the battle, because it throws everything in disarray. I mean, it makes total sense as a strategy to do this, and they were very successful in doing that in the early stages of the first blow of the Iran war on February 28th was to eliminate the leadership, to eliminate all of that highest echelon, the people, both the leader, the supreme leader, and all who are accountable to the supreme leader, and throw the whole country basically into disarray. And so what you have here in the Exodus is a kind of similar action where the elite of Egypt, designated through the firstborn, are eliminated. And once Pharaoh has no firstborn, he's no longer Pharaoh. He's eliminated. It's like he is removed from being Pharaoh. Now he regroups. He is able to pursue the Israelites up to the Red Sea, but that initial blow is a severe blow. Susie, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the other thing about the firstborn, especially with Paro, is that Paro has a measure of divinity about him, and thus his firstborn as well. So you've got, from the first plague, you've got the Nile, you got the 10th plague, you've got the firstborn. Both of them were big hits on the gods of Egypt.
Correct. So there's another thing that's going on here with firstborn, and the divinity part of it has to do with the way that I think the way that we understand firstborn, both in antiquity and I think to a certain extent, it still applies. What does a firstborn do to you? A firstborn, and in the biblical world, it's a male, but it's a firstborn makes you a parent, and a firstborn is the real signifier of a generational transition. Uh, and the firstborn happens because of nature, right? You wed and you have children, and that's the natural course of events. Or you might say, in nature and through the animal husbandry, your flock produces its offspring, and as part of the natural progression of flocks, you have animals that you tend to, and that in the female animals, if you're a shepherd, you know which animals have had offspring and which have not, and you bring that offspring into existence. And there's something that is special about that, because it signifies to you the natural flow, the un uh, uninterrupted natural flow of nature, which we all understand that intuitively. We say this, the door of a door, generation to generation. It's a very ancient concept that we move from generation to generation, and the signifier of a new generation, and the signifier of the future succession of the people is really encapsulated or condensed around the firstborn figure. It's nothing that a firstborn chooses. It comes upon a firstborn just by being the firstborn, and I'll turn to psychology for the analysis of how a firstborn child differs, and really, we all understand, birth order as being significant in terms of personality development and parenting and all of that, and part of that is just because, that's the way it is. We learn from our firstborn to become parents, and the firstborn learns how to be a child. It's all that. Okay, so there is probably a very deep anthropological association with the firstborn, but there's also a deep rooted feeling that this is the cycle of nature, and nature is determining things, and the Torah doesn't like that. Put it bluntly, the Torah doesn't like nature having a role that usurps God. It's God's role, not nature's role. Paganism invests divinity in these forces, uh, but the Bible has as its foundation a core understanding that there are no forces in nature that have deities to them. There's only one God, and this one God ordains everything, including the forces of nature, which are all subservient to God's will. And God, people may emerge as firstborns, but God may have other ideas. Alana, go ahead.
A few things, like the Pidyon Haben, redeeming of the firstborn.
Yeah.
Um, what is behind it actually? And I think it's wrong that it's only for the male firstborns to be redeemed. Okay, so
we'll start with what it actually comes from this parsha, the idea of the firstborn. I'll get to it in a second, which is that once we make the transition from firstborns to Levites, that is, we take the tribe of Levite and we replace the firstborns with the tribe of Levites. Okay, so in the Torah here, there is a slight discrepancy between the number of Levites and the number of firstborns. I had the number written down here. There are 22,000 Levites in the census. Right, when Moses numbers them up, they're 22,000, and they're 22,000. Just happens to be 22,273 firstborns. So if they kind of do a census of all, everybody come forward. Who's your firstborn? You have 22,273 firstborns. And if you're trading 22 the Levites for the firstborns, you have 273 extra firstborns. Okay, and they are supposed to become. They don't get replaced. Since there are only 22,000 Levites, there's an odef. They have extra. There are 273 extra. So they have to symbolize their own redemption by paying a price. They pay a 5 shekel price, not 5, coins, but it's a weight of silver. The shekel is a weight. This is both an actual and symbolic thing in order to attain their exemption from the service. Okay, because I'm explaining it in a complicated way because I think it is complicated. But you're taking one population and you're substituting them for the other population, but it's not a one-to-one because you have 273 who are not going to be replaced. So in order to replace them, you have to do something symbolic, and you have to pay money for that. That's and that lasts to this day, by the way. Yes.
But isn't it to support the Kohanim who don't earn because they are doing the holy work?
So I would say no. It's not to support because I mean you could, if you're the treasurer of the temple, you could have your budget line, which is your income versus expensive, and you budget every year annually like we do at the shul. How much income do we think we're going to get from X, right? What do we get from membership? What do we get from donations? What do we get from this and this and this? So you do your study of the people. You say, how many firstborns do we think we're going to get? We think we're going to get about 1,000 firstborns, and we get 5 shekels per each for this, 5,000 shekels. I doubt it. I think that what happened was the reason why Pidyon Ben became a custom, actually a law in Judaism, was because we have so much fidelity towards this ancestral tradition. The notion of a firstborn being so important to us, and that this transition from the firstborn to the Levites was important, and that it all heralds back not to nature, it heralds back to the Exodus. It's about history and not nature. We redeem the firstborn because our firstborn were saved, right? Had the family not put the blood on the doorposts, those houses would not have been protected, and those firstborns would have perished. So therefore, every single firstborn in that moment owes its life to God, okay? And so that to preserve that idea that your firstborn status is not just a result of nature, but in some ways has an echo of history to it. We enable that to be expressed through the institution of Pidyon Ben, from the redemption of the firstborn. Okay.
It's the first time I hear this.
Okay, well, there you go. This is new.
Connection with the
Exodus. Okay. Now, back to I'm not going to give you a satisfactory answer about firstborn girls. Okay, I'm gonna admit that the Bible, obviously favors transition through the male line for all the reasons that we associate with that. It's a male-oriented transition and tradition, and we preserve that in traditional forms of our practice. Obviously, there are people that are experimenting with pidyon habat or other kinds of things, and we have interesting questions that come up about kohanim and whether or not women can function as kohanim and women can get the first aliyah, and lots of interesting response on that. There was a recent edition of the Hadar community. They have a podcast called Responsa Radio, in which they discuss, can a daughter of a Kohen, a Bat Kohen, function in Birkat Kohanim? And if it's an interesting discussion, in our synagogue, we don't do that. And we don't do that for lots of reasons, including the understanding that, look, this whole institution is altogether not egalitarian, and so why should we superimpose an egalitarian status on the women of the daughters of Kohanim when the whole idea of a Kohen altogether is not egalitarian? That's the easiest way to answer this. Not satisfactory, of course, to people who want totally equality. So, as I said, not helpful. But yeah.
The Brita.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that because it's not legislated in a kind of 8-day celebration, 8-day covenantal commemoration for girls. I think notwithstanding the fact that it's becoming more and more popular, one ought to, if you're a parent of a girl, one ought to take advantage of the leniency that the tradition has in giving yourself a little more time to adjust. Those of us who have made brisses for our sons after 8 days know that it's in our context it's quite complicated to do that and to get everyone together and to make a bris. So it's a little easier not to. And so, given that this imposes a lot of hardships on people, it confuses me as to why people would select that. Make it easy on yourselves.
And the word Brita makes no sense.
Well, okay. Look, the idea that we're all born into a covenant makes sense. The idea that you should commemorate in some way makes sense. But as to how one does that and how one ritualizes it, these things evolve, and until something becomes meaningful and that you feel like you've done it forever. So I've seen a ritual that has that power yet. And of course, nothing will have the power as a circumcision, because a circumcision is an actual cut, an actual blood, an actual terror, an actual fear. And God forbid that we should do anything like that to a girl. Okay, and religion has a place for fear and terror and blood, and it's a good thing that it's a limited place. That's all I want to say.
The Yemenites have something called Zeved Habat.
Zeved Habat. These are other rituals. Okay, let's go on here. So we have the Levi, count the sons of Levi, and then the what we're going to get in the rest of the chapter are the different assignments of the Levi. I'm gonna just move from there and go to this whole idea of what does the Torah think about firstborns, and just give you an example here, okay? And here we'll turn to this, okay? So are the firstborn there blessing or a curse? So look at all the different firstborns here. Cain, very first human born, he was expected to receive the top status. However, his offering was rejected due to his poor attitude. This I'm copying from the internet, okay? He became the first murderer, passing over his opportunity to lead the human family, okay? So Cain is the firstborn. He's a negative feature. Ishmael, firstborn of Abraham, on the Avram side, but not obviously the firstborn of Sarah. He is overlooked for Isaac. Esav is the son of Isaac and Rebekah. Esav is a problematic figure, okay? He sells his birthright. He is a profane person. Reuven is my favorite example of the firstborn being the canard, the kind of dolt. And this is what happens, nature can ordain the child, but nature doesn't necessarily ordain how intelligent or capable that child is. The child may think, in this case, that he is super privileged and super capable, but Reuven overwhelmingly displays bad judgment and negative character traits. And so it's not, we get Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Yehuda becomes the dominant figure in the tribal structure because Reuven is really not a very sympathetic person. Is the son of Judah. He's wicked. Eliab, he passed over from the son of Yishai. The youngest brother David gets it. Here's the best example. Amnon was the rightful heir to the throne. Amnon is the worst character because he rapes his half-sister Tamar, and he will then be killed by his brother Avshalom, ending his chances for the rule. Yes, that would end his chances, okay? Menashe, as opposed to Ephraim, despite being the older son, he was passed over by his grandfather Jacob in favor of his younger brother, okay? So I have this comment here by Jacob Milgram in his JPS commentary. It's a long comment, but it says as follows: the replacement of the firstborn by the Levites implied that the former originally held sacred status. That's interesting. That we have embedded in this something very ancient, that the firstborn has a sacred status. This is supported by the biblical laws regarding the human firstborn. And so you have the verses in Exodus which relate to Kadesh li kol bachor, Peter kol rechem b'vnei Israel, because I saved the firstborn. Okay, I'm going to pass over these texts. The firstborn was, but Milgram goes even beyond that. He's citing some very ancient pre-Israelite customs where the firstborn was expected to care for the burial and worship of his deceased parents. Traces of ancestor worship are found in Mesopotamia, etc., etc. So the firstborn are to take care of the dead. The firstborn have a quasi-priestly status because their role in the family structure was to maintain the connection to the past. And here is where he says something really interesting. Ancestor worship is also attested in Egypt, Ugarit, Israel popular religion. The Bible made preserving a memory of the firstborn bearing a sacred status. His replacement by the Levites may reflect the establishment of a professional inherited priestly class. The deliberate avoidance by the priestly text of the word kadosh may also be due to the fear that the priestly legis had that the family ancestral worship heretofore conducted by the firstborn might be continued by the Levites. They don't want people worshiping their ancestors. But number 6 here, the tradition of reciting Kaddish for one's departed parents, falling upon the male children, especially the firstborn, but recast as a declaration of faith in the establishment of God's kingdom on earth, may be a lineal descendant of an original form of ancestor worship, the reinterpretation of which is reflected in the substitution of Levi to the firstborn. Okay, I'm going to just unpack that for a second and say, what? I read that and I go like, what? What are you talking about? Are you saying that the Kaddish that we do has its origins in the role that the firstborn son had in the family system, and it was originally a way of ancestor worship, but transitioned in Judaism to sanctification of God? I think it's a nice idea. I have to kind of, and have to really kind of go into the bookshelf to figure this out. What it said to me was, Interesting. Yes, people do speak about Kaddish in a very, I'm not going to say mystical way, but I'm going to say in a mythological way, that their Kaddish is a way of connecting them to the dead, whereas the Kaddish really is not about that at all. But separate the idea of what you say in Kaddish and what you experience in Kaddish, and they can be almost two different things. And I I revere and adore the people who are dedicated to doing Kaddish, especially for a whole year after the death of a parent. Um, and part of that is is about, I want to be connected to them. I'm doing this to work through mourning. I'm doing this as a means of coming to the congregation. I, what I want to say, I know he doesn't mean this in any way, negatively, Jacob Milgram. You know, the way Kaddish plays itself out in the living community is very not connected to what he's talking about. The way Kaddish plays this out in the community is, I'm saying Kaddish for a lot of reasons. And I have a lot of experiences when I say Kaddish, including moving through the stages of mourning, including being with the community, including, yes, thinking about the dead and my relationship to the dead. And indeed, also, and this is a line that I say, from time to time, which is, Kaddish is about taking all the pieces that have been shattered in your world and trying to put them together, trying to organize a world and trying to recreate a world that has been really shattered by loss. So Kaddish is an example of us trying to reinforce the principle of creation in our lives by replacing, the soul with the words of sanctification. Now, that's religion talking. That's me talking. That's modern, I think, adaptation and interpretation talking. But prior to this era, you have people saying, "This is my," pointing to their firstborn and saying, "This is my Kaddish. This is my Kaddish Zugar. This is the person who's going to say Kaddish for me. This is the," and it wasn't a female; it was a male. And the women in the conservative movement, we've been saying Kaddish for decades. It's only recently, that is to say, within the last couple of decades, that it's become more and more common among Orthodox women to say Kaddish. One of the best examples was the mother of one of the Frankel kid who was murdered. She's a learned woman, and she said Kaddish, and at the grave of her son. The son was abducted and killed, not in this war, but a couple of decades ago, and everybody said amen to her, and that was a great moment in the evolution of Orthodoxy in Israel. Susie, go ahead.
Yeah, so given when Kaddish for parents and other relatives came about so late in our history, I would say that Milgram's thesis is, to say the very least, quite forced.
Well, so I would agree with you there. I would say that it's we'd have to do the rigorous study of the history of Kaddish to understand this. What I want to say is that it works because it ties into an idea that can has a lot of meaning for us. The idea is to be bound up in the bond of life, and in antiquity that would have included actually worshiping the dead or actually worshiping ancestors. Today it's about invoking them and invoking their memory. My own dad's yahrzeit is coming up tomorrow, and I joke about this all the time because I sneeze like him, and I'm thinking, like, every time I sneeze, I remember my father, because I make a loud sneeze, and when he passed away, I said, it was a sneeze that scared children. And of course, when I sneeze, I can scare children too. And these little things, these anecdotes have a way of, keeping the bond, your bonds and the bonds of life. And when we say, "Tiyeh nishmatot tzurura b'tzura chaim," may your soul be bound up in the bond of life. It's we have to really reflect on what that means. The bond of life is, I am bound to you. I am bound to my children. I am bound to my community in the present and in the future and the past. We're all bound, and we don't want to sever that bond by forgetting. Memory is the way you connect the bond of the dead to the living. You don't want there to be, as Elie Wiesel said many times, a breach between the living and the dead. It took me a long time to understand what he was talking about there, until I kind of figured out, a breach means a canyon, a separation. You don't want there to be any breach between the dead and the living. But the dead are dead, and it's unavoidable. But the only way to not avoid it is to talk about them and to keep them part of your life. And if you keep them part of your life through talking and through memory and through mitzvah and through learning and through wisdom and through Kaddish, then they're part of the bond of life. And that gives us a lot of comfort and it gives us a lot of meaning. And so, yeah, I think that comment that he made is I mean, I would, I'm critical of it only because it didn't make sense. And here we'd have to look at it a little more.
Yeah. Also, when he talks about falling on the firstborn son. So yeah, back in the day, it was the men who said Kaddish. And when you have a firstborn son, you say, okay, he's my Kaddishal because he's the only one there.
Yeah.
But it fell on all children, or at least all male.
Indeed.
Yeah, not just the first.
Yeah. All right. So now I want to go back to this whole thing about what is there an advantage to the Levites organizing this and not? And this there's a tension. I mentioned before I had some things queued up for this. I want to here I like Kevin O'Leary. He has a very short little clip on this. Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank. He's okay. So let's see if this will go here. All right. Family businesses are brutal. You can see. Let's see if he goes up in full screen here. Go.
Is it harder to run a family business or one that isn't made up with family members? Family businesses are hell. Why? Nepotism. You've always got the idiot son or daughter. What are you going to do? And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. If they don't have the skill set to execute, don't put them in a position where they're going to fail. It's not fair to them. Not every child is designed to be an entrepreneur or work in the family business. Show them that respect. But if they have executional skills, there's nothing wrong with nepotism. But very often what I see is complete failure, and it's so unfair, which is why it's so much easier to hire talent and fire talent. How do you fire your wife, your son or your daughter, or your uncle or your brother? It's brutal. Family businesses are tough.
Okay.
Harder to run
I'm sorry.
business?
I brought that in because, first of all, he's an interesting character, Canadian, All-American, whatever. But he's saying something that I think, Stanley, you alluded to before, which is in organizational psychology and in the expectations are so high on family, especially the firstborn, that failure, I don't want to say it's inevitable, but failure often comes, and we have a lot of examples of this where there's failure, and of course, it's not only failure that happens, but tragedies happen in the history of family businesses where a firstborn, the heir either gets killed or dies or whatever. I mean, The Godfather, I didn't look for the clips on this, but Fredo is the perfect example in The Godfather where Sonny is the firstborn. Sonny gets killed, Fredo is the second born, but Fredo is just not, he's not the right material. And it goes to Michael Corleone as the youngest, who becomes like the head of the family as the youngest, because he's the most capable, he has the most charisma, and he has the executive, acumen and skill. That means that the firstborn doesn't have it, and it's an incredibly inefficient way to transition your business. If and here he said, if they have it, great. If they have that skill, go for it. If they don't, hire someone, because it's easier to fire someone that you hire than it's to fire your child, right? You can't do that. And so many families get ruined because of this, and so many businesses also get ruined for it. So when you structure a whole business around the family, you have to be very, very careful. What I want to say, though, is that, well, the Levites, they are structured around family. And why does that work? Or why should it work? I think something else is going on here. We're not talking about business. We're talking about religion. Business has as its objective to succeed and to generate wealth and to generate whatever the business is about. The productivity, growth, etc. Religion is not about wealth, or shouldn't be, at least. Religion is not about wealth. Religion is not about generating that kind of productivity. Religion is about singularly being attentive to God's presence in your life. Now, you could say that not all family members are capable of doing that, and I would agree with that. That's certainly true. But if the language and the dedication and the emoluments and the privilege and the status and the honor and all of the things that are tied to it are deeply embedded in the life of the family, the microculture of that family is sustaining. Look, this is not true of all families. It is certainly true of some families, that some families kind of, they behave like a team. They all get their T-shirts, and they all, have a certain story, and they all cheer on every member, and there's a lot of privacy within a family structure, because the family, either because this was ingrained in them from the very moment that they began to breathe, the children, spoke, that they had an idea that they were unique and special, and that they played a certain role. There are definitely families that are constituted around these ideas. I've seen them dozens of times. Many of us who stand outside of those families, we look at them and go like, wow, isn't that interesting? Look at everybody. They're wearing a T-shirt. They're all together. What a beautiful family and all that. And yeah, there's something to be said for that. Every family has its own indigenous culture that makes for that, if they're organized around that. And then other families are organized around different principles. Like, for example, you organize your family around every kid being independent, and every kid charting out for themselves with the best of their ability where and how they're going to live. And who's to say that that's not a suitable structure for families? And here I would turn to other people with other experience to what kinds of pressures are placed on families and on children especially, because the families demand of them that they have to live up to certain kinds of behaviors or status, or they have to be a certain thing. I think it's an enormous struggle for certain kinds of children who just feel that they don't belong within that kind of structure, and it can create for tremendous conflict and tremendous discomfort, and we have to be attentive to it. I think that's a particularly modern phenomenon, but it probably existed in all places in antiquity. I give my favorite example. I can mention the name here because Stanley, the Paperman family, and it's like, I often return to that example because there's a multi-generational family of funeral directors where the next generation, I knew the people of my peer group, they struggled with it. They struggled with it. They're going to be placed in that whole family system, and they didn't have a choice, and they did, and they ended up being okay, and they had all sorts of other talents, but now today the funeral home is not populated by family members only. It's populated by professionals because they after 4 generations of doing this, they couldn't do it anymore. And that probably happens more often than not. Anyway, what do you think?
What about the blessing for the firstborn?
The blessing for the firstborn.
Yeah, is this right?
To bless them,
No, like Esav and Yaakov, look what it came to.
Look what it came to. So the Bible has its veiled criticism of that. It never worked out. When these favoritisms happened, it always kind of backfired. Bob, I see your hand.
What I wanted to comment on was that the placement of this discussion following your Parsha talk last week in terms of social policy makes a lot of sense, because as long as you have the Jubilee year and the social policies there, even if families goof up in some way, there's a chance to recalibrate. I have a more difficult time, even with the best functioning family, if you're dealing with certain types of tariffs and other sorts of policy decisions that can undermine the best family farm, the best family business. And so I'm wondering what the Torah has to say about the juxtaposition of these parshiot.
It's a great question, and I'm not sure what it would say. I would just take a more 20,000-foot look here, which is, when I interpret this, I also want to say that wherever there's a collision between what religion or God thinks is important and the family wins. And the Bible sees the family as the primary structuring unit for humanity. This is clear from Genesis 1. It's clear from Genesis 11. It's clear from the way that our people is constructed as a family, and it's, I think, clear in the way that each one of us understands peoplehood, as a larger construct of family. And so, it was the late Professor Avraham Malamat, who I was privileged to study with at the Hebrew University, who said the Bible projects the idea of the family onto the global canvas. It's a lovely line which says, when you look at the family of humanity, Shem, Ham, and Yafet, all of the different nations in chapter 11 of Genesis, what is it saying? It's saying that we're all related. And so here, I would say that the selection of the tribe of Levi over the firstborn is pro-family. How so? Because the result of taking out the firstborn from every family and getting them to work in the temple is horribly destabilizing for the family. Imagine, okay? All of us, we're projecting, but if we have our firstborn males, okay, and they are born to us, we have a brit, we have a pidyon ben, and then we say bye-bye, like Hannah said to Samuel, okay? You read that chapter 1 and 2 of the book of Samuel, and you see she's happy to give him away, but she's actually broken, and she's a mother. She made her pledge, and she has to live up to her pledge, and it's very painful for her to give up Samuel. It destroys her. She's very proud of the fact that he becomes a prophet, and he lives in Shiloh. And he's got the surrogate father, Eli, but he's around ugliness, a lot of ugliness. And wouldn't she have rather said, I didn't mean it. Sorry, I want him back. It destabilizes her. It's a kind of loss. The way that a loss of, God forbid, but these are the things that destabilize families and make families have to reconstitute themselves in all sorts of ways. So the Bible is totally aware of this. And I think that the choice of Levite is primarily a choice, it's a pro-family choice, which says we want families to stay intact. We want firstborns to stay within their native family structures. And, if we want to run the temple, we'll take a whole tribe and we'll put them in there and we'll let them, reproduce and transmit their family private culture in that way, give them status, give them honor, and give them tremendous responsibility and restrict them in some way also. But we'll have a functioning people that way.
Thank you. May I ask one other question,
Yeah,
which
sure.
I know you won't have time to answer, but I've read some places where they say that Adam was the firstborn of humanity. And I'm wondering if you have any reflections in the context of this discussion of what that means.
Well, sure, because as the firstborn, so well, he's not really born. That's
It's
the
first
other thing.
created.
The first created. So, and he's not really created out of nature. He's created by God. So that's where I would go with that. That, yeah, he has privilege and status because of that, and we all mythologically and symbolically descend from it to as a way of expressing the indivisibility of humanity, that that we're all equally related to one another. That's what Adam means, I think, in
Uh,
symbolic terms. Yes.
it seems that the firstborn did not follow the Jewish ways, the Jewish religion, like you mentioned before, Shem, Ham, and
Yafet,
Yefet.
right,
Shem,
is the firstborn.
anti-Semite.
No, Shem is we're Shem.
Shem is the good one?
Shem is the good. Cham is the bad. Cham and Yafet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So what
okay.
about Ishmael and Esau?
Yeah. So Yishmael, look, we have to read the Bible without the thousands of years of history after it. Ishmael is a very sympathetic character in the Bible. We've kind of layered upon him a lot of our animosity towards that part of the world, but Ishmael is a dutiful son, okay, so he's a little wild and rambunctious, but he's
But towards the Jewish ways, I'm
so
saying.
these are all, good pre-Jewish examples. Marlene Herman, go ahead.
So Ishmael is a sympathetic character until we cross the sea.
Well, what did we do?
Where were all those people? Who were all those other tribes? Didn't they emanate from part of his group?
No, I mean, are you referring to
The Jebusites and the Jebusites and all those other.
No. Those were the inhabitants of the land already. Their ancestry is not Ishmael. Their ancestry is Canaanite. They're from Ham. They're all related to Ham, and we hate Ham. We hated Canaanites. We didn't hate Ishmaelites. We
So
hated.
who are the Jewish people that came from Noah?
Yeah.
The Shem people?
So good question. So the Hebrew Ever comes from the line of Shem. Ham is the progenitor of Canaan and Mitzrayim. And this is, it's not lost on us that the Bible really has no taste for either Egypt and Canaan. Kemaseh Eretz Mitzrayim lo tasu, Kemaseh Eretz Canaan. Don't be like the Egyptians and don't be like the Canaanites. And what they're referring to probably is they are pagan oppressors of people, and they're also sexually licentious and debauched. Okay, and so you need to conduct yourselves as a people with a degree of reverence for basic family structures, which they didn't have. They don't like that. The Bible can't stand Canaanites. They think that Canaanites are a bunch of, orgiastic, licentious, libidinous people. Go figure. All right. Well, on that note, we should end. Have a good week, everybody.